Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you were able to make it this morning and be here with us. I see there's a few people that are still joining in. Everybody's introducing themselves. So I want to go ahead and do the same. My name is Denise Loya. I am the newest addition to the prevention team here at TAASA. I just started in November, mid-November, as a matter of fact. And so this is going to be my first webinar with TAASA. So I'm really excited to be here with everybody and to share some information with you and to learn from you all as well. So looking through everybody's introductions, we have people from across the state from Texas, but we also have some people from different places. We have somebody from Arizona, shout out to Arizona, from Atlanta, from Ohio. So we've got a few different people from across the nation, different places that are going to be represented here. So it's really excited to be able to hear everybody's thoughts about where we are and what we're doing here. And from South Florida, we have somebody from Florida too. That's great. So we're just going to go ahead and get started here as other people are joining in. They'll kind of jump in where we're at. I'll have Emiliano helping me with the chat box. So if you have questions, if you have comments, please go ahead and type those in the chat box anytime throughout the webinar. As questions are coming up, we can go ahead and answer those as we continue forward. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be focusing today on the prevention principles. As you all know, it's been changing back and forth. We started with, I believe it was 9, and then we cut down to 6, and now we're back up to 12. So a lot of you at this point may be feeling a little bit confused or lost or unsure about where it is that we're going, how many principles there are and what we're doing with them and how they apply directly to our work. A lot of them are going to be pretty self-explanatory in the sense that you already have a firm grasp of what they are and what they mean. Some of them may be a little bit more convoluted and a little bit harder for you to follow along with. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through each of the principles for you in a pretty mainstream quick way. We've only got about an hour together. But again, if you have questions, you have comments, please feel free to interact and type things in the chat box. So I'm going to be going over both, since we have people from out of the state as well. I'm going to be going over what the minimum state standards are for each of the prevention principles, but I'm also going to be talking about them in general as they would apply to prevention work as a whole. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first principle is that you want it to be comprehensive. So when we think about comprehensive, one of the easiest ways for me to understand that concept is thinking about fine dining. So I'm a foodie. I love to eat great food. So when I think about a meal, I think about fine dining in terms of the different courses of a meal. So when you start off, the picture you can see there, you can start off with a soup, with a salad, then you have something else. And the picture here, you can see the empanadas. And as you move your way to the far left of the screen, you can see the penne pasta. And so that's what it's going to look like. As you move through the courses, that's what you want your program to be like. You want it to be rather comprehensive. You don't want it to be just like a sandwich that you would take for lunch, which is fine, but you want something that's going to build. You want something that's going to be comprehensive. You want something that's going to highlight different aspects of your work and of your community. So you want to be working at the multiple levels. You want to be working at the individual, relationship, community, and societal levels. And you want to be using those different levels to address your protective and risk factors. So when you think about the analogy to dining, you can think about how engaged your 5 senses are while you're eating. You want to think about the smell of things, how that's going to whet your appetite. You want to think about the different textures that you're going to be eating. You want to think about the different ways the different food will play off of each other. You want to think about the plating, what that's going to look like, how that's going to be more appetizing for you as well. So you're going to be working at all these different levels in your prevention work, but you're also going to be thinking about that analogy of fine dining experience. Um, if you want to think about adding wine to example, for example, if you want to think about how drinking different wines at different courses are going to enhance the meal in different ways. And so you can think of that as analogous to your community. You want to invite your community to the table. You want them to enhance what you already have going on. And when you think about what makes a complete fine dining experience, it's the people you're sharing the meal with. And so again, those are your community level partners. Those are going to be the people that you want at the table with you. You want to have great conversation, great food, great company. And that's at the heart of what prevention work is going to be. You want to have different people at the table. You want to have different ideas, um, different people at the table that are going to enhance the meal and enhance your programming. And so that's one of the ways to start thinking about that. And so when you're talking about these protective and risk factors, that leads us to the second principle, which is primary prevention. It's a bit odd to have as one of the principles this very thing you're going to be working on. But prevention, I think the easiest way to try to understand this is that the risk factors are going to decrease and your protective factors are going to increase. And that's at the very heart of primary prevention, is that you want to be able to address these risk factors that you see in your community, and your hope then with your work is that you're going to decrease these risk factors. And the way you can begin addressing those risk factors is by insulating your community with protective factors. And so we know through the plan amendment, which is specific to the state of Texas, that the state has identified specific risk factors and protective factors that they want to be working with. But in general, for those of you working outside of the state of Texas, you're going to know your communities, and you're going to know the communities that you're working with in terms of where are the primary issues that are cause for concern for you. What are those factors that are problematic in your schools, that are problematic in your community, and how can you begin addressing those? And so when you begin to look at that relationship between risk factors and protective factors, it makes sense then to think that as you begin to work on those protective factors, those risk factors are going to start to decrease. And so that's an easier way to start thinking about that. And so remember, the risk factors and the protective factors for the state of Texas are laid out in that plan amendment, and I believe Emiliano gave you a link to where you can find that in the chat box, in case you're not already familiar with those. And so when you're looking at addressing those risk factors and those protective factors, you want to think about how often should we be doing this, and that leads us into our third principle, which is dosage. So we want to look at what is sufficient dosage. When you think about dosage, I think about medication, for example. I think about how should I be taking pills, medication, vitamins, supplements, whatever you're thinking about. And so again, for the state standards, we've laid out what the minimum is. You're going to be looking at working specifically with youth, 4th to 12th grade. We're looking at 9 in-person sessions, 45 minutes per session. So we have those things laid out for us, as well as what it's going to look like for adult influencers as you're working with either youth or adult influencers from phase 1 into phase 2. But in general, we're also looking at, it's been proven that multiple sessions are clearly more effective than singular dosages, than singular sessions. And so when we think of prevention, we want to think about watering not just often, but deep. And so you want quality over quantity. So because we're working with changes in attitudes and beliefs, it stands to reason that it's going to take time to get there, that it's not going to work with just a one-time presentation or maybe 2 presentations, that that's not enough time for you to work with your community and get to know them and have them get to know and trust you to build those effective relationships that are going to be important for affecting positive change in the community. So again, when you're looking at that, you want to make sure that you're following those minimum state guidelines. If you can do more, that's even better. When you're looking at it in general, for those of you that are doing work outside of the state, again, it's been proven to be more effective if you're working with your community, with your target population in multiple sessions rather than in singular ones. So you want to make sure your dosage is appropriate for your community and the work that you're doing with them. And so when you're thinking about the kind of work that you're doing with them and what you're doing in your community, you want to make sure that your programming is going to be socioculturally relevant. And so when you think about this, for me, it made more sense to think about it in terms of a puzzle. And so you're putting together this puzzle, and so you need all the pieces to fit together, and you want to make sure that you have all the important pieces, not just the corners, for example, not just your administrators and your teachers, not just the bigger organizations or agencies in your community. You want everybody represented because every piece of the puzzle is going to be important. And so with regard to that, you want to make sure that your community is involved in your planning, in your adaptation, in your implementation, the different evaluative measures that you're going to be using. You want to make sure to involve them in the overall program, how it's going to be reviewed. You want to make sure that your content is appropriate in approach. So it's important to involve your community in that way. You want to make sure that the work that you're doing is going to fit your community and that it's relevant for them. So because you want to make sure that it's relevant for them, that it's appropriate for them, and that it fits them, it's important to be flexible. Because working in the community, you're going to be responsible for the community and to the community. You want to make sure that you're not just an outsider coming in to say, here's what I see, what's wrong, here's what I see you need help with, let me be the one to help you. You want to make sure that you're listening to them and you're listening to what they have to say in terms of where they see problematic areas, where they see that they need to grow more. Where you also want to be aware of what they bring to the table in terms of the assets that they have. So you really want to be a part of the community, not somebody who's just working with the community. You want to be a part of the people that are there so that you can build that mutual trust, because again, that's going to be a key factor in being able to effectively change attitudes and beliefs and behaviors. And that's, again, at the core of what we're doing here. So those are the things you want to be sure you're looking at. And again, there's those definitive minimum standards for the state, but those are just good general rules of thumb to follow in any kind of programming, is that you're involving your target audience, you're involving the people you're working with, the students, if you're working with students, the adults, if you're working with them. Allow them to be part of that planning process. Allow them to have feedback in what's going on so that you're building something that's relevant for them. You're going to go in definitely with a game plan, but you want to make sure that you're staying in touch with them and not being above or outside of what you're working with in those areas. So because you want to make sure that you're inclusive and that you're doing something that's relevant for your community, it's also going to be really important to be collaborative. And so when we're talking about being collaborative, it's going to be a matter of having strategies that are going to involve your relevant partners, having strategies, initiatives that are going to bring together the people in your community that are most indicative of your community. You want to involve the partners, the organizations, the different agencies in the work that you're going to be doing. And again, that goes back to being comprehensive. So you can see how the different principles don't just stand alone, but they really are designed to be taken as a whole to really build effective programming. There's a question that's asking, do you consider it to be more important to focus on the schools that will allow multiple sessions or spread out to the entire service area, even if it means you will only be afforded the opportunity to present the information? Um, I'm assuming that means maybe present the information just once. Um, and again, best practice would indicate that primary prevention is not going to be a matter of a one-time presentation, because a one-time presentation is going to be more about just giving information. And giving information is important. You definitely want to let your community know who you are, what services you can offer, and how you can help. That's definitely really important. But in terms of prevention programming, that's not the same thing. When you're looking at prevention programming, you're going to want to build a rapport with your audience, whether it's students, whether it's adults, whether it's a combination of the two. Ideally, it would be students and adults. You want to be working at both levels. Because there's going to be something that's more intensive, primary prevention by its nature is going to be addressing those risk factors, those protective factors to prevent instances of perpetration, to prevent sexual violence before it begins. And that's not by any means an easy task. So because that's what you're getting at, a one-time presentation isn't going to get at the heart of really working with people and getting them to recognize what are the behaviors as a community, what are their behaviors that have been instilled in them. You're looking at societal level issues in terms of belief systems, behaviors, and to be able to get at that, you really need to have multiple sessions to be able to build that rapport and build that trust with the people you're working with, so that they can begin to trust you and begin to trust when you say, let's look at this analytically. And to begin to change those norms, that's going to take time. Anybody that's tried to do something different or something new knows that the first time you do it is not going to stick. It takes consistent practice. And so that's what these multiple sessions are. It's going to be practice for you to continue analytically and critically looking at the world around you and seeing what can you do to create a safer community, and what can you do to create a community around you that doesn't tolerate gender biases, which ultimately are going to lead to instances where we will have violence against women in the form of, not always but oftentimes, sexual violence, and what that looks like. So I would definitely say that best practice would be focusing on multiple sessions rather than spreading the service out and doing singular sessions. Again, that singular session work is going to be important, but it's not prevention work. It's going to be more in terms of community outreach and letting the community know who you are and what services you can offer. Prevention by nature is going to necessitate those multiple sessions. That was a great question. Thank you for that. So because you want to be able to do something that's more comprehensive and collaborative, you want to make sure that you're including those different people. Not just your students if you're working in the schools, but also the teachers, the administrators, and not just people within the school, but people within the community as well. And so that leads us into the next question, which is about the adult influencers. Is there a minimum dosage that you would recommend? So the minimum dosage that we're looking at in terms of the state mandates, we're looking at something specific for adult influencers. We're looking at 8 in-person hours or at least 2 sessions. That's going to be the minimum state standard in Texas. Now, of course, if you can do more is always better, but that's going to be the minimum for adult influencers that you're working with. If you're going to be taking those adult influencers through phase 1 and through phase 2 working, if you're in the state of Texas again. If you are doing adult influencers, but your target audience is going to be that youth, the minimum standard is there's no adult minimum time that you want to spend with them, but you want to spend enough time. And you think again about the previous question, which was, is it better to do one session or to do multiple sessions? And best practice again would say to do multiple sessions, because that's going to be better in terms of building that collaboration, in terms of building something that's comprehensive. So those are kind of the things that you want to keep in mind as you continue to build a program. Um, so again, that was another great question. Um, so part of being collaborative and coming back to this, being collaborative and making sure that different voices are included and different people are going to be involved in your programming. You also want to make sure that it's cohesive. This collaboration that you're building is cohesive, and that you're working toward the same end. Because you're going to have a lot of different voices and a lot of different opinions. Because you're trying to be collaborative, you also have to be, part of your work is going to be managing those expectations and making sure that you're clear about what your work will do in the community, what it can do and what it can't do in the amount of time that you have. And given that, that's why it's going to be really important to move over to having something in writing, having something kind of an MOU, memorandum of understanding, an affiliation agreement, some sort of letter of support from your partners where your programming is going to be implemented. And that's going to be important in terms of what your commitment is to that community. You want to make sure that it's very clearly spelled out so that there are no surprises, so that it's clear how long you're going to be working in the community, particularly for those of you that are in the state of Texas. We're looking at a 3-year grant cycle. So you want to make sure that you've included that you're going to be in the community for at least the minimum of those 3 years, and what's going to happen, what your timeline is for different things to be happening during those times, and what those expectations are going to be on either side. So that's going to be really important with them as well. There are some other questions here. Let's see. Amy's asking if any attendees have suggestions about how to convince the stakeholders, that is the schools, to allow multiple sessions, especially when they have so many other mandates that lessen the amount of time they have available to give to agencies that want to come and present or collaborate with them. I think that's another great point to bring up. It is difficult when you're going to stakeholders, when you're going to schools, and you're telling an AP or a principal, for example, I'd like to take about 10 weeks of your time in the spring when it's testing in the state of Texas. That's going to be a hard sell. But what you want to do is it's really important then to have this collaborative kind of work, that community level work going on before you go in, so that you can capitalize on that and really build on that momentum to be able to show that you're part of that community, that you're not just somebody from the outside coming in to take up time, but that you're there to share your time with your students, and you're there to build something with them and to build something in the school that's going to be helpful to them. So that when you're coming to them with your pitch about the kind of work that you can do, it's not just, oh, I'm going to take 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks of your time once a week in these classes, that you're really building on those collaborative partnerships that you've started, and you're looking at things that are going to be helpful for the school and for that community in general. I think part of that is being able to use to your advantage the reputation that your agency has built in the community. You want to be able to offer them best practices, for example, and that kind of leads into some of the other principles we have, which is the next one we're going to get to, which is about based on evidence. So you want to be able to provide something to the schools when you're trying to do that pitch and you're trying to build those relationships, is you want something that's going to be based on evidence. There are minimum state standards that you're going to have, but in general, for those of you that are working outside of the state, you want to have programs that are going to be built on data. And because primary prevention as a whole is a relatively new and burgeoning field in terms of established and practiced evidence that's out there for us in terms of utilize curriculum, things like that. You want to be able to use data that's in your community. You want to be able to do your needs and resources assessments. You want to be able to use statistical data observations from your community. So you want to be able to pull reports from your police department, from your hospitals, from your schools. What kind of things do they have going on? What's happening in your community, and use that as the evidence about what you can do. And so when you go to make your pitch, if you have that evidence behind you and behind your program, it's not just you going in to take time, to take class time. It's you asking to share that time so that you can cohesively build a safer community. And so those are going to be the things that will definitely help. And it's just going to be also a matter of time. And so when you think about going back to the idea of dosage, going back to the idea of multiple sessions or singular sessions, that's where you want to be able to draw that line and not spread yourself too thin where you're doing a little bit everywhere and not really enough, that you really want to get in there and spend your time and build something, and that will help build the momentum for how your program can grow. There's another question about adult influencer sessions, whether that's 8 hours over 2 sessions, or 8 hours over 2 sessions, or 8 hours or 2 sessions. So in terms of what the minimum standard is going to be, it's got to have to be 8 in-person hours, so it can't be like a webinar, for instance. It's got to be in-person hours, and you want to have a minimum of 2 sessions. Because when you think about having one session that's 8 hours, think about the trainings that you've been to, and think about anything that's over 8 hours. There's only a certain amount of information that you're going to be able to hold on to. And so to be effective and to really be able to get at the adult influencers, to help them understand the work that you're doing with the youth, you really want to have it spread out over that minimum of 2 sessions. Again, this is a minimum. If you can do more, that's better. If you're able to work with adult influencers where you can have more than 2 sessions, where you can have more than 8 hours, that's even better. If you can get into a regular rotation of working with adult influencers where you can be there maybe for departmental meetings or for staff in-service days, if you can get those where you're in there a minimum of a couple of times a year, that's going to be even better for you. And so remember, these are minimum standards. We would definitely encourage you, if you have the resources to be able to do a little bit more, that would be better. But in terms of sustaining long-term work, if you start off smaller and then build up, that's also a possibility too. Don't shortchange yourselves and go in thinking, well, I have to have, 10 sessions. That if you start off small and then build those relationships, build that rapport, and you can go up to including more than the 2 sessions. That's the minimum. Another question that came up is time to build relationships with the school systems and let them see that you are not there just to build your program, but to help them. What is this? This is Connie. Connie works with PE classes in the middle schools because that's not the core classes. So maybe that's another good trick, another good way to get into the systems when trying to do your pitch with the schools, is asking about working with maybe non-core classes. That might be one of the ways that you start to build that relationship. And again, that this is going to take time, that because you're working with multiple sessions, again, that's a factor of time, that these relationships, again, are built over time. And that's another good suggestion that Connie has, to start small, maybe 1 or 2 classes, and then build up from there. Connie has some more suggestions. Phase 2 for the work that Connie is doing is youth development. And so you really need 10 to 12 students who can grow the foundation you are looking for. Big vision, starting one step at a time. And so that's the truth. When you're looking at, for those of you working in the state of Texas, you're looking at the 3-year grant cycle. Think about, you're going to have to start small, like Connie's saying. When you're looking with phase 2, whether it's youth development or bystander intervention, you're going to start with a smaller group. If you have 10 to 12, that's going to be great. If you have a smaller group, you're going to work with what you have, and you're going to build momentum as those students get involved and they start reaching out into the community. Other people are going to see what they're doing and they're going to want to get involved. You're going to build interest. You're going to build that buy-in. And you start one step at a time. We've got some other comments about from Tiffany about working with any classes that you can, with gym, with health, English, math. As long as you can get your 5 sessions in, they'll go to that classroom. Sometimes you settle for less, but we reach out to the teacher, and you're in Ohio. So the minimum is going to be a little bit different there, but it's still the same idea of working with multiple sessions, not working with just one. And if you have that flexibility, maybe to go in and do 3 sessions, and then once they see like, oh, okay, I see where we're going here, you can build that buy-in and work your way up if you have that kind of flexibility, depending on what your state is mandating as a minimum. Somebody is asking about any specific research about one-time presentations that feel impact initially. Assemblies, performance pieces, in which cases the impact diminishes over time. I don't have access to any specific research. Maybe some of the other attendees have some of that research. But I think when you're looking at one kind of things that you mentioned, like one-time presentations, maybe an assembly, maybe a performance piece, you can use those as maybe ways of building that buy-in, of maybe when you're looking, for those of you working in the state of Texas, when you're looking at your phase 2 programming, having your students do maybe a performance piece or lead an assembly that's going to create that buy-in that's going to get people to want to participate, and that's how you can start to grow where you're going. But I think that's going to be more in terms of building interest to get people in and to start creating that buy-in. And I think those are definitely great strategies to be able to use as well. And so when you're looking at evidence, again, you want to make sure that you're using the best available evidence that there is. And you know your community. And that's where this graphic is coming from. We are the evidence. So you are the evidence. You know what's working in your communities. You know who you're working with, what's working with them, what's not working with them, what they're responding to, and what they're not responding to as much. Where are some of their strengths? What are some of the collectively build together something that's going to be meaningful for them? So again, you know your community, so you want to be able to use the needs and resources assessments that you can do with your community to build that evidence. And again, that's going to take some time. Again, that's going to take some time. And one of the other things that you're going to want to build over time is kind of this idea of being well trained. And this is one of these examples of being well trained, is being able to interact with other people in the field that are doing the same work and see what they're using that's working. Build momentum off of each other, build support for one another, maybe try different ideas, see what's working in different places, and share those ideas with each other. When we're looking in the state of Texas, we're looking at a minimum standard. And again, this is a minimum standard for the state of Texas, but this is good also for those of you that are not in the state. It's kind of just good practice to make sure that those of you that are going to be implementing prevention programming are well versed in the theory of prevention and the practice of prevention, and that they're trained in facilitation, which is different than presenting. So you want to make sure you're allowing those opportunities to build those facilitation skills. And that you also want to have some kind of training that's going to allow you to have a better understanding of community mobilization and what that looks like. And the stages of youth development, cultural competency, because those are all going to be important factors. Um, and so those are good things as a general rule of thumb to make sure that your implementers are going to be well versed in. Um, Additionally, the minimum state standard for the state of Texas is that you have those kinds of trainings on those topics within the first 6 months of starting your work. And these are going to be important things to build so that you can create that when you're working with your students, when you're with your adult influencers, so that when you go in to make the pitch to those principals, to your administrators, that you have a firm enough grounding in the work that you're doing that you can create that buy-in. Um, so again, that plan amendment is going to lay out what exactly the minimum state standards are for training, and they're very specific about a number of things. So you want to make sure to reference that amendment and what that is. But in general, you want to make sure that you're creating opportunities for your staff to be well trained, to network, as the picture shows, to network with other people, and not necessarily just in a formal setting, but in a more casual setting where they're talking to each other and working with each other rather than just trying to um, just get names and get resources, but really talk to each other and really help each other think through the process of what prevention work is going to look like and what could work with your different communities. Coming back to the chat box, there's some of you that are also having issues in terms of only being able to do a set amount of sessions, that the school's only agreeing to certain things. And so that's, again, where some of you, depending on where you're doing your work and what the standards are that your state is setting forth, some of you have that flexibility to be able to do less sessions, and that's just going to be a matter of time and building that rapport with your community. And that's why it's really going to be important to do that community level work, so that when you go in, you already have some buy-in from the community. They know who you are. They've seen your work. They've seen you in the community as a vested part of it, not just somebody that's coming in from an agency to do a specific set of things on the agency's agenda. Here's another question from Amy. The box curriculum of some sort that is evidence-based or you use. So this is a question, I guess, about what curriculum is being used, if it's evidence-based or if you're creating your own. The Break the Box curriculum that TAASA is providing for in-state service providers is going to be something that, yes, that it is evidence-based, and yes, it is approved by the Office of the Attorney General. And so when you're creating your own, you want to make sure that you're using evidence-based theories there as well, and you also want to make sure that you're following the guidelines set forth by the Office of the Attorney General. One of the things that Crystal is suggesting in terms of having trouble getting a buy-in from the school is consider partnering with another community agency to host an after-school program. I know I'm familiar with some of the work that Crystal's been doing out in San Angelo. She's been working with after-school programs with great success. So that's another great thing to keep in mind. If you're having a hard time getting in with the schools, then maybe you want to try a different route. Maybe you want to try a route that's going to be outside of the school programs, maybe an after-school program, maybe at a community rec center. There are different ways that you can go about that, maybe with a Boys and Girls Club, maybe with other programs at your local Y. And so that's where it's really important to be part of your community and have your finger on the pulse of the community. What's going on? What's working? Where are your students gathering? Where are your target audiences? Where do they hang out? Where are they going? How can you use that to be able to understand what they're doing and understand what they're going through, and use that to really build your programming in a way that it's relevant for them, which is going to be key to making it successful. Julie is saying that the program started with one session, then moved to 3, and then moved to the full 7 sessions. They also used evidence-informed curriculum, but they tailor the program to fit to the audiences. It makes it easier for schools to buy into the program when you're using evidence-based curriculum because it's comprehensive and again based on evidence. So again, there's some people out here that have already been doing work that have said they've had similar issues getting in and just kind of started small and then gradually worked their way out and built to something bigger and stronger. Emiliana also listed a resource there for you from the NSVRC. That should be helpful. Another question about what does research say about how close together multiple sessions should be within days of each other, weeks, and a few days, or a few in the fall and a few in the spring. So Connie's saying she did it once a month and once a week. It's going to be, again, depending on what you can get. If you can do once a week, that's going to be great timing for you if you can do it once a week. And it works better not to have it too spread out because you want to make sure that your students aren't forgetting what you're talking about. So if you have it once a week, there's still going to be time for them to really process the things that you've been talking about. But if you go out too much further than a week, it's going to be hard to build a momentum and it's going to be harder for them to maintain what you've talked about if they don't have any practice in particular. And if you're the only person that's going in to talk to them about these kinds of things, it's going to be really hard to build that buy-in. So again, when you're talking about that buy-in, you want to come back to what those minimum state standards are. But again, a good general rule of thumb to make sure you're well-versed, your implementers, your trainers are going to be well-versed in these different areas, and that you provide those opportunities for them to work with people across the state and people in other states that are doing similar work so that you can see different resources so that you can begin to share with each other again and build a stronger community so that you don't feel so isolated in the work that you're doing. Because sometimes the gravity and the level of the work can sometimes be overwhelming. So it's important as implementers, as those of you who are preventioneers across the state and across the nation are having your support networks built in as well. And training is a great opportunity for you to be able to do that. So a lot of questions have been coming up about how often and when, so that kind of leads us to appropriately timed in development. So you want to have something that's going to be developmentally relevant to your target population. So you want to be able to address those risk and protective factors that are most important to them. And so you want it appropriately timed. So when you think about these seedlings, for example, when you're planting something for the first time, you have to water it consistently. You have to water it all the time. As it begins to grow, it's not that you don't have to water it anymore. It's that it's maybe not as much or as intensive because it's already, you've given it roots. So as you've given it roots, there are other things you want to make sure to still prune, to still attend to what you're doing. So when you're thinking about your programming, it's going to take a lot of work at the very beginning. It's going to be a lot of constant care, constant vigilance when you're just starting. But as your program continues to grow, as you give it roots, you're going to be able to see how it's going to thrive. And so that's going to be really important to your work. So you want to make sure that you're also aware that the same things don't work for everyone. So that's where it's going to be appropriately timed. If you're going with the analogy again of the planting, some plants are going to need full sun. Some plants are going to need full shade. So again, the same things are not going to work across the board for everybody. So it goes back to making sure that you're comprehensive, that you're flexible, that it's socio and culturally relevant for your audience. And then in that same way that it's appropriately timed in development. So when we're looking at, one of the other questions that's come up a lot is about the evidence kind of based. So when we're looking at sound theory of change, this is a great little comic here about something that happens, and there's that second step there where it's a miracle occurs. And so when you're looking at sound theory of change, you want to be specific about that. You want to be in a position where you're using a logic model, where you're not just, I'm going to go in 3 times and then sexual violence is going to stop happening at this school. That's kind of where the miracle occurs. And so you need to be a little bit more specific about that. So when you're talking about sound theory of change, you're going to use something that's going to be a step-by-step process. And so you want to be able to use a logical theory of change that's going to provide rationale behind why a specific intervention will work and why the strategies and the initiatives that you're going to be using will create change. You want to be able to have, again, basic logic, those steps about why you think this is going to work and what leads you to believe that this is going to work. And so that kind of ties back into the evidence-based theory, this sound theory of change. You want to have a basic logic model. Why are you doing what you're doing? And what is it that leads you to believe that this is going to work in your community? There's some other questions about, do agencies focus on an age, children, middle, high school, college, adult? So those are great questions. Different agencies are going to be working with different target ages. So for us in the state of Texas, the target population age is going to range from 4th to 12th or college. You can also do adult influencers. But it would be best practice to focus on one. So for example, to have a program that's going to do elementary through middle through high school, it's going to be really hard to do in terms of capacity. So you want to make sure whatever focus you're going to have, that you have the capacity to work at that level. So if you're working with children in middle and high school and college, that's going to be difficult to do. Again, you want to keep in mind capacity, because you want to have multiple stations that are relevant and that are important to them. And you want to make sure that your trainers aren't going to get burned out either. Somebody's also bringing up Stephanie's also bringing up the Break the Box curriculum, getting into the middle schools, but the high schools being hesitant because they're already hearing it at different levels. So that you can stay the same in the community. So again, you want to make sure that goes back into building something that's collaborative, into building using things that are appropriately timed. So you want to have it change. So even though it's the same programming, you want to make sure that you're tailoring it for your audience. So you want to make sure to go back to your community level work. What's happening in your community? What's happening with the high school students? And how can you tailor the program to fit that? So you want to think about your phase 2 work and what that's going to look like, and really see and hear from those students what's happening in their community and what's important to them. And that goes back again to the next principle, which is building on supportive and positive relationships. So you want to be able to create opportunities for healthy interactions, and you want to be able to model those healthy interactions. Excuse me. So you want to involve the community, the teachers, the staff, the different family members, peers, different things like that. You want to be able to build those relationships. And again, that's going to be going directly back into one of those protective factors of building that sense of connectedness. And that's going to be a key factor in positively affecting change in your community. So you really want to build on those positive relationships as possible. And use that to feed your programming. Use that to feed the different levels at which they're happening. And use that to hear, and the example that Stephanie's giving about schools being hesitant because they're already hearing that, then ask them what is it that they need to change? What is it that they feel needs to be addressed in high school that wasn't necessarily something that was happening in the middle school? And use that to drive your programming. Use those positive relationships to be able to build that buy-in, and to be able to build your community influencing your programming and what you're doing and how you're doing it. And that kind of leads us to the next one, which is varied teaching methods. So this is going to be kind of like a fidget box. So the same way that everybody has different learning styles, different ways of understanding, of processing things. Um, you want to make sure that you're addressing the different learning styles of your audience. So some people are going to be more auditory learners, some people are going to be more tactile or hands-on learners. So you want to make sure that you're using um, different skill-based learning activities that are going to be engaging your students in different ways. Again, the key there is you want to build programming that's interactive. You want to steer away from passive learning where it's just lecture style. You want to have them actively involved and engaged in what they're doing. So you want to have different kinds of learning activities like writing exercises, role playing, maybe musical components to what you're doing. You want to be able to engage your audience in different ways. And so that also keeps you on your toes, and it also keeps you consistently learning. And when your students, when your audience see that it's a two-way street, that it's you learning from them and that it's them learning from you, you have a more effective buy-in. And you have a general process that allows you to work together. It helps build that rapport, that helps build that supportive kind of relationship in which it's not just information going one way. And so when you have your students actively involved, when you have them actively engaged, it's easier to reinforce that message. And you want to make sure that you're reinforcing those messages in varied context in ways that are going to prove to be more resonant for them. And then you want to look at our last principle, which is outcome evaluation. And what I used here was an image of a maze, of a labyrinth. And I think oftentimes when people think about outcome evaluation, you're thinking of a test. You're thinking of a standard pencil and paper kind of test. So when you think of evaluation, it's really important to think of evaluation as a process, so that it's continuously monitoring what's happening throughout the implementation of your program. So it's not just getting to the middle and saying, okay, we got here, everybody's here. It's looking at the process. It's looking at maybe people who weren't as actively engaged, and maybe they got lost somewhere along the way, and kind of going back through the process and looking at what happened. Where did you get lost? How did this get lost? How can we keep this from happening again for somebody else? And so the key there for evaluation is going to be that it has to be continuous in going on throughout your implementation. And so for the state standards, those of you that are working in the state of Texas, they're going to be required outcomes, different definitive tools for measurement that you're going to have to use that will be forthcoming from the state. But we want to encourage you to use additional evaluation tools as well, whether they're formal or informal. It's really important to be able to use those as a way of building comprehensive programming that's going to be effective for your audience. So you want to be able to look not just at the traditional pre and post test, but you want to look at the process overall. You want to be able to look at the different ways, the different paths that people are taking in their understanding of your message, of your content, and you want to look at the different ways that and the different places that people are getting stuck or that are proving to be problematic, and look at the different ways that you can help circumnavigate that you can help them work around that, or that you can maybe be more clear or more specific. Or that could also lead to finding out maybe there's something you're addressing that isn't so much of a problem in that particular setting with that particular group of students, but maybe there's another area that you hadn't considered that might be a good place to begin more inquiries about what could happen, about what their community is looking like, what they're hearing from their community. And so if you have that evaluation going on consistently throughout your implementation of the programming, that's going to be really helpful to building something that's going to be relevant and that's going to be impactful and important for them, that they're going to be, the students you're working with, the adult influences you're working with are going to be those agents of change in their community, and that's really what you want out of your programming. Excuse me. So one of the important things to consider is that although these 12 principles may seem a little bit disconnected or may seem to not have inherent connections to each other, it's really important to see that these are all important parts of what come together to make effective programming. So if we were to go back to that, the first image of that fine dining experience, you want to think of these as individual components to that fine dining experience. All of these are going to build off of each other and help you come to a more nuanced understanding of what a program can be and how it can evolve over time, and how what's strong at one point can go in different places that you hadn't imagined and can really build into something beyond what you had initially envisioned, and be even stronger. So again, these are going to be important parts to any kind of effective and comprehensive programming, which is going to be key to sustaining that change that we want to see in our community. There were some great questions coming from the audience in terms of evidence-based dosage, what that's going to look like. We have a few minutes left, so I just want to open up to see if there are any other questions or comments about any of the principles, or maybe any of the ways that it's going to work in terms of actual programming for your community or for your areas. I think for the most part we were able to get through most of the questions or the comments about different things that have worked, or how people have started off maybe with smaller sessions and then built up to more sessions, more time. So Connie's asking a question, saying phase 1 is the easy part, but I'm struggling with thinking through a phase 2 portion. So when you're thinking about your phase 2 guidelines, this is where it gets a little bit more difficult to envision, because it's going to be whether you're doing and again, Kai is coming to us from Texas, so we're looking at specific phase 1 and phase 2 programming for the state of Texas. But those of you that are not within the state, we're just looking at how we can build from one kind of curriculum-driven stage of programming to another stage where we're really allowing the students to take what they've learned from the curriculum-based learning and really use it as a platform for something else in their community. In the state of Texas, we're doing phase 2 has 2 possible avenues, which would be youth development or by-center intervention. So when you're thinking of the phase 2, Connie, you want to think about how your youth is leading that, whether it's by-center intervention, which is going to have more skill building at the onset of it, or when you're looking at the youth development, you want to really let your youth lead what that is, but you want to give possible venues for them to go. So you're going to really let them drive what that programming is going to look like, but you want to have set out tools that they can begin to use. So whether it's by-center intervention, you want to build those skills early on and provide guided direction for them and how they can begin to implement by-center intervention. If you're doing youth development, you want to have possible projects laid out for them on how they can begin to be those leaders of change in their community. So it's just a matter of thinking about your youth, thinking about your community, and what are ways that you've seen have worked for them, what are some interests for them, and as you're doing phase 1, to start asking them questions with phase 2 in mind, and kind of using those as your guidelines for phase 2. And I think that's something we can definitely talk about more in detail, Connie, as maybe we meet later at the end of this week for our gathering. Melissa is also asking, when will the evaluation tools be given? We're hoping that those should be coming out sometime in February. Early February is when we're hoping those will be rolled out. We'll definitely be in touch about when those are going to be forthcoming. Again, thank you so much for your time. There's going to be a brief survey after this about the webinar, and I wanted to remind you of some upcoming webinars we're going to have with TAASA later this month. Tuesday, January the 19th, we're going to have Climbing the Ladder of Manhood, Power, Race, and Masculinity Today, which should be a great webinar. Again, on Tuesday, the 19th of January. And then at the end of the month, we're going to have a primary prevention and social justice platform, which is going to be Friday, January 29th from 10:30 to 12. Again, these are Central Standard Times. That prevention social justice webinar is going to be a great one to join in on too for those of you working outside of the state as well. This is going to be a great platform to start thinking about different things and social justice as it applies to our prevention work. Um, um, we've got some great stuff coming up. Thank you for all your questions, and thank you for sharing your time with us. I hope you all have a great week. Thanks again. Take care.